Welcome to the podcast, Amazing Tales About History, and I'm your host, Mike Allen. Were you ever the first to do anything? I mean, like maybe you were first in line at a new movie, or first to climb a hill, or first to drive on a road after it was freshly repaved. Well, those are all very minor accomplishments compared to the record of Homero Catan. Now, Homero left a record that I guarantee you almost nobody will top, because he was the first to do over 500 things. Things like driving through the Lincoln Tunnel. You're simply not going to believe it when you hear it. But you can believe our guest today, Justin Rivers. He's with Untapped New York, and he has the story of this unbelievable character, Homero, from the 1900s. And Justin, well, he's the Chief Experience Officer for Untapped New York. And keeping up with Homero's experiences would be a full-time job in itself. I'm going to go back for a second to 1989. Carl Yastrzemski was being inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, I was a huge Jazz fan, so I drove with a friend up to Cooperstown, New York, very early on the day of the ceremony, and we got incredible positions on the rope line where Yaz was going to pass by on his way to the clubhouse. There was nobody between us and the rope. We were that early. Now, of course, as fate would have it, Yaz didn't show up until late in the day, and more people ended up crowding in behind us to the point where we couldn't even leave our spot to visit the porta potty or we'd never get back. We stood out in the blazing summer sun, getting a wicked sunburn for all of our trouble. But then Yaz did finally walk by, and the excitement, well, it was over in the blink of an eye. A long time to wait for a very brief moment of satisfaction. I share this story because it has at least a little relevance to our story today. We're going to focus on a Brooklyn-born man named Homero Catan. Now, back in the 1900s, he decided he wanted to be first in line and first to do a lot of things, like drive through the Lincoln Tunnel. Now, by the time he had passed away, he had accumulated more than 525 such accomplishments to his name, and the media and most others referred to him simply as Mr. First. Well, here to tell us about Homero's exploits is the Chief Experience Officer for Untapped New York, which is a group that provides experiences for groups in New York City. His name, Justin Rivers. So, Justin, when we talk about this guy, Homero Catan, this guy's a bank teller, born in Brooklyn, ended up living a good part of his life, I think, in New Jersey, ended up going on to become an office manager at a concessionaire firm that supplied refreshments to Yankee Stadium and Belmont Park. But that's not why we're talking about him. We're talking about him because of what he did on his side time, his off time. And he was known as Mr. First. Let's just do a sort of a big picture. What do you know about why this guy started doing this? What was his motivation?
Omar Khattan, as he told the story, because he was an incredible storyteller, and all of the narratives that he weaves through all the different articles that ended up, in hindsight, kind of figuring out this guy was a force to be reckoned with and what he did. He said that he remembered, I believe it was his uncle, telling the story of being the first guy to, I believe it was, walk over the Brooklyn Bridge. The first member of the public, because actually the first person to do that was Emily Roebling. And he was so fascinated by this as a kid that he said that he kind of wanted to do that. He wanted to be the first guy to do all of these things like his uncle was. And of course, he was born at a great time because after his childhood, New York started building all of this incredible infrastructure. And he went all over the country. But we started building the interstate highways and bridges and tunnels. And he had the opportunity to be the first one to either drive through them, or cross over them, or pay a toll. And I believe it was, he totaled 537 firsts, which is incredible.
So he did a lot of things, as you said, 537, which is the number I've seen as well. And, you know, there are many what you might call smaller, but nevertheless very impressive events that he was, you know, the first at. But the one that really put him, I guess, on the front page of all the newspapers and made him a star was the Lincoln Tunnel. Tell us that story.
The Lincoln Tunnel itself was a huge feat of engineering. coming up on the heels of the George Washington Bridge. And again, one of the reasons why it was even called the Lincoln Tunnel was because you had the George Washington Bridge. And at that point in his career, Catan had sort of already banked a bunch of firsts that were less traffic related, or vehicular related. And he had decided that this was going to be his real announcement to the world. So he drives up, he sort of, sachets his way to the front of the opening of the Lincoln Tunnel, and he announces himself as Mr. First. And with him at the time is actually his brother, who will start being known as Mr. Second. And it's when he gets to be the first person to drive through the Lincoln Tunnel from New York to New Jersey that he starts catching the eye of the press. And then, of course, it snowballs from there.
Now, you're right that there were some smaller and yet some pretty significant ones before that. And about a year before that, he was at Rockefeller Center in Midtown Manhattan when Rockefeller opened up the ice skating rink. What did he do there?
He recognized, I think, when other people didn't. I love Rockefeller Center, and I know a lot about the history of Rockefeller Center. And the ice rink at Rockefeller Center was built as an attempt to save the very underutilized lower plaza of Rockefeller Center. We sort of can't imagine that today because that's what brings everybody to Rockefeller Center, that when the tree is out. And I think he recognized that this ice rink was going to be a very big part of New York City culture. And he became the first person to skate on it. And I think that's huge. I mean, I obviously all the firsts that he did were pretty big, but to be the first person to skate on Rockefeller Center skating rink when so many people have skated on it, so many famous skaters have launched their career or come back to sort of promote their career on it. And he was the first when they opened in 1939. It was absolutely incredible.
Now, one of the other ones he had done was the Triborough Bridge, but as you say, the Lincoln Tunnel really put him on the map. And the Lincoln Tunnel, if I have my history right, it's really 3 tunnels. And I guess one of the later tunnels that opened, he went through the first tunnel that was open, but one of the later tunnels was going to open when he was serving in World War II. What did his brother do?
So he actually asked his brother to step in for him. It was, I believe, they opened the second or the third tunnel in 1945. He was still serving overseas, and his brother had joined him on many trips. And as I had mentioned, he'd become Mr. Second, and this was sort of a tag team thing. And he said, well, you can go. Let's keep the family name going. So his brother drove. He was the first to drive through the newest edition of the Lincoln Tunnel in his brother's stead. And his brother basically got a taste of fame, and he liked it.
Now, I've seen some photos of this particular incident, and there was, on purpose, 2 photos put into this one article. One that showed O'Mara's brother asleep in his car waiting for the tunnel to open, and another gentleman sleeping in another car who I believe was George Horn, somebody who was now becoming a competitor to them. And so they were both sleeping at the entrance to the tunnel trying to become the first one, but I guess Catan's brother beat him to it.
The myth and lore about the Catan brothers, especially O'Mara, was, O'Mara would say, it's not just getting up early and being the first one in line. He would spend sort of days, maybe even weeks, staking out what the situation was, where they were going to let people start queuing, who was in charge. He'd start talking to people on the ground. He said literally, greasing some palms. I'm sure there was a couple of, dollar bills exchanged for some people to make sure that they got up to the front of the line at some point. And so his brother watched that, and I'm pretty sure his brother kind of followed in his footsteps. They were both very charismatic gentlemen. I also think it's very interesting that I believe his brother went on to sort of change his name so that it was less ethnic. I think his brother kind of liked the limelight. So his name was Michael Catan, but he changed it to Michael Caton because I think he felt that just looked better in papers, which I thought was really interesting. And of course, that creates a huge rift between the brothers after that event because he gets the taste of fame and likes it.
Yeah, we're going to go down into their retirement years here in just a second. I want to run through a couple of these first. So, Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, Verrazano Narrows Bridge, first to meet the ocean liners Queen Mary and Normandy, first to meet the Zeppelins Graf and von Hindenburg, first to ride 5 subway lines, and the Madison Avenue bus. It replaced the trolley on Madison Avenue, did it not?
Yeah, 1935, between 35 into the early 40s, the city was basically beginning to take streetcars off the avenues. They were replacing it with bus services, and the Madison Avenue bus comes online in 1935, replacing the old trolley line. And O'Mara was the first on that one. Yeah.
And 2 others quickly. The first one to swim in New York City's first public swimming pool. I love that. The first ticket holder for 2 World's Fairs. And my favorite is that he was the first person to put a coin in New York City's first parking meter. Is that true?
That is true. And he was the first person to use the subway token. When the subway token was created in 1953, he was the first one to put it in a turnstile.
You gotta love it. Now, let's go into their retirement. They go down to Florida now, and I guess it was semi-retirement because they continued to do some firsts when they were there, and they were living just 20 minutes apart. I guess O'Mara was in Fort Lauderdale in a retirement community, and Michael was in Margate, and yet they weren't speaking to each other, were they?
No. So, yeah, they lived about 20 minutes away. I believe it was the New York Times obituary of O'Mara. I think they actually published much later after his death. He died in 1995, and it said almost in near biblical resonance, Catan and Caton, or both Catan and Catan, didn't speak to each other. They were in deadlock competition with each other. And to think that these older men are in retirement in Florida, living 20 minutes from each other, not speaking to each other. Catan would sort of go back and forth and say, I'm Mr. First, there's nobody else. That's just my brother, or, he's Mr. Second. Michael actually stayed pretty quiet throughout the whole thing, but Catan would die, I believe, in 95. And I think Michael, his brother, would die in 2006 or 7. Not exact. I don't remember the exact date. They never really reconciled.
One of the interesting aspects about O'Mara Catan is that when he got down to Florida, actually, he shifted gears a little bit and took up shuffleboard.
Yeah, so he loved shuffleboard. He became like a shuffleboard nut. And he was he was a Catholic Italian, Brooklyn Italian. And when Pope John Paul II was planning a trip to America, he decided he was going to take it upon himself to teach the Pope how to play shuffleboard. And so he invited him to, for a lesson. The Pope did not, I believe, take him up on it, but very interesting. He had a lot of spunk and energy, that man.
So, Justin, one last point here, which is, when we talk about setting records, usually the Guinness Book of World Records sends an associate, a representative to watch and observe and make sure standards are met. We're pretty much taking this on face value with these gentlemen.
I believe we are. I think also, though, it was so well publicized, a lot of their bigger feats, that you have to believe it. The charisma, the sort of level of detail. I mean, we haven't even gone into some of the other firsts that they were involved in. I mean, he was the first to drive down the New Jersey Turnpike. There's so many things that he had accomplished, and he was so good at it that, yes, was there somebody there to verify each one of those? No. And I believe one of the things that was very telling was in an interview, his brother, Michael, had claimed that he had gone to over 600 openings. And O'Mara said, he's lying. It's 537. So when you have that kind of number in your head, when you've lived your life with that kind of ethos, trying to be Mr. First, you got to believe it.
And nobody actually ever challenged him either.
Nobody's ever challenged him. No. And I think he had this quote when he drove through the Lincoln Tunnel as a young man. He said, this is something my grandchildren are going to talk about. This is something everybody talks about now when they talk about these monumental firsts. And again, I think it speaks to the time period as well. We don't have a lot of those opportunities that he did then. There aren't a lot of new pieces of infrastructure that are opening, new bridges, new tunnels, new highways. He was the right man for the right time.
A Hollywood film studio offered O'Mara and his brother Michael $50,000 for the rights to make a movie about their story. O'Mara ended up nixing the deal because he'd already been approached, he said, by a filmmaker in Wisconsin who offered him just $1,000 for the rights to feature just O'Mara. Well, because relations had become so strained between the brothers, O'Mara held firm and refused to participate in a project that would feature both Mr. First and Mr. Second. Well, the Wisconsin filmmaker was never located, and apparently he never made the movie. That wraps up this episode of Amazing Tales About History. I want to thank our guest for today's program, Justin Rivers, Chief Experience Officer for Untapped New York, a group that you can find online and that can take you on very memorable tours around New York City. Amazing Tales About History is a production of True North Associates, LLC. This is Mike Allen. Be safe and stay healthy.